The moment I walked into my department chief's office and saw the old man from the cafeteria sitting in the chair across from her desk, not in the faded flannel shirt and worn khakis I remembered, but in a charcoal suit with a hospital system badge clipped to his lapel, I actually stopped moving. My hand was still on the doorknob. I stood there like someone had hit pause on my entire nervous system. He looked at me the same way he had 3 weeks earlier, over a cup of coffee that had gone cold while he fumbled with his wallet. Calm, almost like he'd been waiting. My department chief looked up from her desk and said, "Close the door, Sarah." I did. But my legs barely remembered how to carry me to the chair. Let me back up. I was 28 months into my internal medicine residency at Houston Methodist, which meant I had mastered exactly 2 things: functioning on 4 hours of sleep and pretending I wasn't terrified every single day. The hospital was enormous. The kind of place where you could work the same floor for 6 months and still get lost trying to find the service elevator. 42 floors, 3 connected towers. A cafeteria on the 2nd floor of the main building that smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner and, on good days, something vaguely resembling real food. I ate there more mornings than I'd like to admit, usually around 6:15, before rounds started, when the place was still half empty, and the only sounds were the hiss of the coffee machine and the distant clatter of someone stacking trays. I'd grab whatever was hot, find a corner table, and spend 20 minutes being a human being before I had to go back to being a doctor. That particular Tuesday in November, I was running about 3 minutes behind and already dreading the day. The night before, my attending doctor, Harmon, had pulled me aside after evening rounds to tell me that my progress note on a patient in room 412 was embarrassingly thin, and that if I couldn't produce clinical documentation that reflected actual thought, I should seriously reconsider whether I was cut out for internal medicine. He'd said it quietly, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted it. That measured, almost gentle tone he used when he wanted to make sure the words landed correctly. I had gone home, rewritten the note, reread it 4 times, decided it was fine the first time, and then lain awake until 2 in the morning wondering if he was right. So I was not in a magnanimous mood when I got to the cafeteria that Tuesday. I just wanted coffee and something with enough calories to get me through morning rounds without my hands shaking. I was standing at the register, waiting for the cashier to ring up my tray, when I noticed the man in front of me. He was older, maybe late 60s or early 70s, with the kind of posture that seemed deliberate even in a moment as ordinary as standing in a cafeteria line. White hair, closely cropped, a flannel shirt tucked into khakis that had been ironed at some point but were doing their best. He had a tray with a bowl of oatmeal, a cup of coffee, and a small glass of orange juice. Not much. The cashier, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses hanging around her neck, was giving him a look I recognized. Patient but firm. The kind of look that says, "I've already explained this twice. Sir, it's showing a $7 balance on the card. You'd need a different form of payment." The man patted his jacket pocket, then his pants pockets, slowly, like he was surprised to find them empty. "I'm sorry," he said. "I must have left my other card upstairs." He had a voice like someone who had spent a long time being listened to, low, unhurried, but his ears had gone red, the way ears do when someone is more embarrassed than they're letting on. The cashier glanced at the line behind him. I was the only one there, but the look still communicated inconvenience. "I can hold the tray at the station while you go get it," she said. I watched the man look down at his oatmeal for a second. Just a second. Then he nodded and started to push the tray toward her. I don't know exactly why I did what I did next. I wasn't in a generous mood. I was tired and anxious and already mentally composing my rebuttal to whatever Dr. Harmon was going to say about my notes that morning. But something about watching a man in his late 60s turn red over $7 while standing in front of a bowl of oatmeal just, I don't know. It felt wrong in a way I couldn't leave alone. "I've got it," I said, and handed the cashier a 10 before either of them could respond. The man turned around. He looked at me the way people sometimes do when they're trying to figure out if they've been helped or pitied, because those are 2 very different things and the distinction matters. "You don't have to do that," he said. "It's oatmeal," I said. "Please don't worry about it." He held my gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, and said, "Thank you." Not the reflexive thank you people give when a door is held open. Something more deliberate than that. I grabbed my tray, found my corner table, drank my coffee, and forgot about it. Or tried to. The rest of that Tuesday was the kind of day that takes years off your life. I had 7 patients on my list, 2 of whom had developed complications overnight that my notes, the embarrassingly thin ones, apparently had failed to adequately anticipate. Dr. Harmon ran rounds like a cross-examination, asking questions he already knew the answers to, and waiting just long enough after your wrong answer for everyone to feel the silence. I stumbled twice. Once on a medication interaction question and once on the likely source of a fever that, in retrospect, was obvious. After rounds, he didn't say anything to me directly. He just handed me a printout of my patient list with 3 notes circled in red pen and walked away. I stood in the hallway holding that printout for probably 30 seconds, alone, and thought very seriously about calling my mother. My co-resident found me in the workroom about an hour later. He set a coffee on the desk next to me without saying anything, which is how I knew he'd either witnessed the rounds or heard about them. "Harmon?" he said. "Harmon," I said. He pulled up a chair. "You know, Martinez told me he circled something on her notes, and it turned out to be a typo. Just a typo. He circled it in red pen and handed it back without saying a word. That's designed to make you feel small," I said. "Yes," he agreed. "It is." My co-resident had been in the program 6 months longer than me and had developed a philosophical calm about Dr. Harmon that I had not yet achieved. His theory was that attendings like Dr. Harmon had been trained the same way humiliation as pedagogy, fear as motivation, and genuinely believed it produced better doctors. He didn't think Harmon was malicious. He thought Harmon was a man who had been broken in a particular way and was now efficiently breaking everyone around him, fully convinced he was doing them a favor. I appreciated the theory. I did not find it comforting. The weeks that followed settled into a pattern. I came in early, documented carefully, read more than I had ever read in my life, and still found myself on the wrong end of Dr. Harmon's measured disappointment at least twice a week. He had a specific skill for identifying the one thing you hadn't prepared for and landing on it in front of the team. Not loudly, never loudly, just precisely, like a needle finding the one gap in the seam. I started keeping a notebook. Not for patient notes for the questions he asked, so I could make sure I knew the answers next time. I stayed late. I came in on my day off once, just to follow up on a patient whose case had been bothering me, and found a finding that changed his treatment plan. Dr. Harmon acknowledged it during rounds with a single nod. No praise, nothing effusive. Just a nod, and then we moved on. I told myself the nod was something. I was not entirely sure I believed it. About 3 weeks after the morning in the cafeteria, I was walking out of the elevator on the 2nd floor, heading to grab lunch before an afternoon clinic, when I saw the old man again. He was standing near the entrance to the cafeteria in the same flannel and khakis combination, and he was talking to one of the hospital administrators I recognized but couldn't name, a woman in her 40s who always seemed to be walking very quickly in the opposite direction of wherever I was going. They were having what appeared to be a quiet, serious conversation. The administrator had her hands clasped in front of her and was nodding in a way that suggested she was listening extremely carefully. The old man saw me before I could decide whether to walk past or acknowledge him. He smiled, just slightly, and gave me the same nod he'd given me in the cafeteria, unhurried, like he had exactly the time for it. I smiled back and kept walking. I thought about it for the rest of the afternoon, not obsessively, just the way you think about something small that doesn't quite fit the shape of its surroundings. The next morning I was called to my department chief's office. Her name was Dr. Patricia Okafor, and she had been chief of internal medicine for 11 years. She was precise, demanding, and fair in a way that felt almost old-fashioned in a hospital that size. She didn't summon residents unless something had happened, and in my experience, what had happened was usually either very good or very bad, with almost no middle ground. I knocked. She told me to come in, and when I opened the door and saw the old man sitting in the chair across from her desk, I stopped walking and stood there with my hand still on the doorknob, doing the mental arithmetic that none of the numbers were adding up for. He was wearing a suit, charcoal gray, well-fitted, a hospital system badge on his lapel. He looked exactly the same as he had in the cafeteria, except for those 2 details, which changed everything. "Close the door, Sarah," Dr. Okafor said. I closed it and sat down in the 2nd chair, and for a moment nobody said anything. Then the old man leaned forward slightly and said, "I believe we've met." His name was Dr. Robert Caulfield. He had spent 32 years at Johns Hopkins research, clinical practice, medical education, eventually administration. For the past 4 years, he had been quietly consulting for hospital systems across the country, assessing clinical culture, training pipelines, and what he described as the distance between what a hospital says it values and what it actually rewards. He had been brought in by the Houston Methodist Board to conduct a 6-week assessment before they made a decision about the vacant chief medical officer position. He had not announced himself when he arrived. That was intentional. I sat across from him and Dr. Okafor and processed this information in pieces, because absorbing it all at once wasn't something my brain was prepared to do at 7:45 in the morning. "I want to be straightforward with you, Doctor," Caulfield said, "because I think you deserve that." He had a way of speaking that made you feel like the words were being chosen carefully, not performed. I spent 5 weeks walking these floors. I sat in on rounds when I could. I ate in the cafeteria, and I rode the elevators, and I asked questions when people let me. He paused. I watched a lot of interactions. I thought about the morning with the oatmeal, the red ears, the tray being pushed across the counter. "That morning in the cafeteria," I said, "you left your card upstairs on purpose." He looked at me for a moment. "I left my wallet upstairs." I waited. "Whether that was on purpose is a more complicated question," he said, and something around his eyes shifted in a way that might have been amusement. I was curious what the line behind me would do. Most mornings I'd stood there and people looked at their phones. Dr. Okafor was watching me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. Not cold, not warm. Professional in the specific way that means she already knew everything and was watching to see how I handled knowing it. "I also watched rounds," Dr. Caulfield said, and his tone changed, just slightly. Not harder, but more deliberate. For several weeks, the cafeteria was no longer the part of this conversation I was focused on. There are things that happen in training programs that are passed down so reliably that people stop questioning whether they should continue, he said. The belief that public correction builds resilience, that fear sharpens attention, that the way to produce excellent physicians is to make sure they feel, at all times, that they are one mistake away from catastrophe. He picked up a folder from the edge of Dr. Okafor's desk. I hadn't noticed it there and opened it. I recognized the format. It was a clinical observation report, the kind used for accreditation reviews. Dense with notes, highlighted in places. "I watched Dr. Harmon run rounds on your service for 4 separate mornings," he said, "and I watched how he spoke to residents, all of the residents, not just you." He closed the folder again. "There is a version of rigorous that produces excellent physicians, and there is a version that produces physicians who have learned to be very, very afraid, and to pass that fear on. Those are not the same thing, and the difference matters enormously for the patients." I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound like I was either agreeing too quickly or defending someone I didn't want to defend. "You documented a finding 3 weeks ago on a patient in room 412, Dr. Caulfield said. The note was returned to you marked up. My stomach shifted. "I read the original note," he said. "It was not thin. It was thorough, correctly reasoned, and demonstrated exactly the kind of integrative clinical thinking that we spend 3 years trying to build." He set the folder back on the edge of the desk. It was marked up because there was a word choice on the 3rd line that differed from how the attending would have phrased it. Not clinically, stylistically. The room was very quiet. I had rewritten that note 4 times. I had lain awake until 2 in the morning over that note. "I want to be clear," Dr. Caulfield said. "I'm not here to adjudicate a grievance. That's not what this meeting is, Doctor. Okafor and I have been discussing a number of structural questions about this program, and those conversations are ongoing." He looked at me steadily. "But I wanted to speak with you directly, because I watched how you handled being treated that way, and I watched what you did with it. I thought about the notebook, the extra hours, the day off I'd spent following up on a patient nobody had asked me to follow up on. You didn't get smaller," he said. "You got more careful, and there's a meaningful difference." I realized my hands were folded in my lap and I was gripping them harder than I'd intended. "The cafeteria," I said, because I felt like it needed to be said. I wasn't I wasn't thinking about anything when I did that. I just didn't want to watch someone's oatmeal get taken away. He nodded. "I know," he said. "That's why it told me something." Dr. Okafor spoke for the first time since I'd sat down. "We're not asking you to do anything or decide anything today," she said. "Dr. Caulfield wanted to meet with several residents personally as part of the assessment. You're one of 4 he asked to speak with." I nodded. "I do want to say one more thing," Dr. Caulfield said, and he leaned forward slightly. "The way people do when they want to make sure the next part lands. The way you were treated this month is not the standard we hold here, or the standard we intend to hold. Changes are coming to how this program is structured, and to certain supervisory arrangements. Those decisions have been made." He paused. "You didn't cause them, and you don't need to carry them. But you should know they're coming, and you should know why." I walked out of Dr. Okafor's office at 8:03 in the morning, stood in the hallway for a moment, and then kept walking because I had rounds in 11 minutes and 3 patients whose morning labs I hadn't checked yet. My co-resident found me in the workroom at 8:15, same as most mornings. He set a coffee next to my keyboard without being asked. I told him about the meeting in pieces. The way you tell someone about a car accident, not because you're being dramatic, but because the sequence of it still doesn't feel like it happened in the right order. He listened without interrupting, which was one of his better qualities. When I finished, he said, "The oatmeal." "The oatmeal," I said. "You paid $7 for a stranger's oatmeal, and he turned out to be the person deciding the future of this program. That is an accurate summary." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I want to be the kind of person that happens to." "You would have paid for the oatmeal," I said. "I would like to believe that," he said. "I'm not sure I would have. I was in that cafeteria at 6:15 most of last month, and I was always looking at my phone. I thought about that, about how many mornings I had also looked at my phone, and what had been different about that particular Tuesday. I'm not sure there was anything different, honestly. I was tired and anxious, and not in any mood to be generous with anyone. The man's ears had turned red, and it had bothered me. That was all. It wasn't virtue. It was just a small discomfort that I'd been too tired to rationalize myself out of acting on. Maybe that's the most honest version of how decency works. Not that we're better than our worst moments, just that sometimes we're too exhausted to construct the excuse that would let us walk away. Rounds that morning were different. Not dramatically. Dr. Harmon ran them the same way he always did, with the same measured precision and the same loaded silences after wrong answers. But I stood in the hallway and answered his questions and looked at him and thought about what Dr. Caulfield had said. That there was a version of rigorous and a version of fear, and that the difference mattered. I thought about the note I had rewritten 4 times. I thought about the word choice on the 3rd line that wasn't clinical, just stylistic, and I thought about lying awake until 2 in the morning over a stylistic choice. I answered his questions correctly that morning. Not perfectly, I still stumbled on the dosing question for the patient in 408, and I knew before the silence fell that I'd gotten it wrong. But when the silence landed, I said, "I'll look that up and have the correct number documented in the note within the hour," and he nodded and moved on, and I didn't feel afraid. I felt like someone doing a job. It felt different. 3 weeks later, the program director sent a department-wide email about upcoming changes to the residency supervision structure, effective the following academic year. It was written in the careful institutional language that makes everything sound like a routine update, but anyone who had been paying attention could read between the lines. New observation protocols, revised feedback guidelines, a new committee on resident support that would report directly to the chief medical officer, whose appointment, the email noted, would be announced at the next department faculty meeting. My co-resident forwarded me the email with no message. Just forwarded. Dr. Caulfield's appointment was announced on a Wednesday morning in December. I was in the workroom when the notification came through on the hospital intranet. The brief biography listed Johns Hopkins, the consulting work, 32 years of contributions to clinical training. There was a photograph, slightly formal, but recognizable, the same steady expression, the same posture that seemed deliberate even in a still image. I sat with the coffee my co-resident had set on my desk and read the announcement twice. My attending for December rotation was different from Dr. Harmon, a woman named Dr. Vasquez, who ran rounds like a conversation rather than a trial, who said I don't know when she didn't know, who asked residents not just what they thought but why they thought it and then waited for the actual answer. Rounds under her felt like rounds were supposed to feel, I thought. Like practice. I still kept the notebook. Not because I needed it the way I had, but because the habit had become useful. Writing things down, staying with the questions, not letting the things I didn't know accumulate in the back corners where they'd embarrass me. Eventually those were good instincts, regardless of where they'd come from. On the last morning of December, I ran into Dr. Caulfield in the cafeteria. He was at the same counter where I'd first seen him, with the same bowl of oatmeal and the same cup of coffee. This time he was paying with a card that worked fine. He saw me and nodded. "Good morning, Dr. Mitchell," he said. It was the first time anyone had called me that without it feeling like a test. I got my coffee and sat at the corner table that had been my table since my first week of residency, and for a few minutes the cafeteria was quiet the way it is at 6:15, half empty and unhurried, smelling like burnt coffee and something that might have been real food. I thought about what he'd said in Dr. Okafor's office that I had not gotten smaller. I wasn't sure that was entirely true. I think there were mornings in November when I had gotten smaller, by increments, in the small daily ways that are hard to see from the inside. I think the notebook was, in part, evidence of that, a record of everything I was afraid of not knowing. But I also thought about the morning in the parking garage the week before, when I'd found a new intern sitting in her car at 7 a.m., windows fogged up, clearly not going in. I had knocked on the glass and asked if she was okay. She said she was fine. I said I'd been not fine in a parked car at 7 a.m. before, and it was okay either way. She had laughed, surprised, and then come inside, and I'd walked with her to the elevator and showed her the shortcut to the second-floor workroom that saves about 4 minutes and matters more than it should when you have 6 patients and rounds starting at 7:30. Small things, but they add up in one direction or another. They always do. I finished my coffee and went upstairs to check morning labs and get ready for rounds. And the day started the way every day starts in that hospital: too fast, with too much to hold in your head at once, and no guarantee that you'll hold all of it. But you try. You document carefully and you ask the question when you don't know the answer, and you walk with the new intern to the elevator because you remember what it felt like when nobody did. The Marine Corps teaches you a lot of things. That's how the story in that video ended. And I remembered watching it once, before I understood what I was actually watching. The hospital teaches you things too, and not all of them are about medicine. Some of them are about the kind of doctor you want to be. Some of them are about the kind of person you already are when no one is keeping score, and the cafeteria is half empty, and the man in front of you is about to have his oatmeal taken away. You find out who you are in those moments, whether you're looking for the information or not. I wasn't looking. Turns out it found me anyway.